Stephen, great to see you. Big news in D.C., and I know neither one of us have read it yet. I don't really know that it matters if I read it because I don't know what it means. But the breaking news is coming out that Trump isn't immune. But what I don't get is I get that there's a difference between he can't necessarily commit murder, but there are certain acts that he would as president be immune from, as would anyone in their job, right? So, I mean, I assume the devil's in the detail with this ruling.
Well, yes, as you mentioned, I haven't read it yet, but I can tell you right now that we've always understood this is going to go to the United States Supreme Court. The D.C. circuit, unfortunately, for a long time has been a very left-wing circuit. Just like as we've learned over the last 3 years, for those who haven't followed it, the D.C. courts overall are extremely left-wing, and including the district court judges. So it's not a surprise, it's a disappointment. The bottom line here in all of this is that a president is definitionally, constitutionally immune when it comes to the execution of his office.
Right.
The reasons for this should be quite obvious. We've all heard the examples, but I'll run through a few of them. Obama killed a lot of people, including innocents, in drone strikes, killed an American citizen in a drone strike. Why couldn't he be prosecuted for felony murder? Joe Biden, for example, stole billions of dollars from Americans to illegally pay off student loans in a midterm gambit. Why couldn't he be prosecuted for literally grand larceny to the scale of hundreds of billions of dollars? Joe Biden also, of course, is responsible for the largest epidemic of child trafficking in human history. So it stands to reason that he can be prosecuted for several 100,000 counts of child trafficking, which if you stack those sentences would be about 1 million years behind bars. And the examples would go on and on and on.
And I'm not a lawyer. You guys run America First Legal, and that's why I was saying at the beginning, isn't the devil in the detail? Because what I have been told is that there's a difference between the actions you take as president, and you're absolutely right. I mean, a president orders military strikes, and they shouldn't be able to get sued because somebody was killed or weaponry was not used properly, right? We all get that. But at the same time, if Joe Biden or Barack Obama or Bill Clinton or George W. Bush or any president were to walk down the street and shoot somebody, that's not as a function of their job, and they could still be prosecuted for murder. Is that not? I mean, that's how I'm understanding this, and that the case, therefore, is saying what Trump did was acting as a candidate, not as a president.
Right, but the absurd hypotheticals that have been brought up by the radical left, for example, what if a president just started ordering, assassinations of innocent people and things of that nature, are deliberate deflections and obfuscations, because this it's not even in the same stadium, it's not in the same city, it's not in the same galaxy, it's not even in the same universe. And so it's actually an attempt to fog and cloud the debate. There's no reason to even entertain those hypotheticals. Because if you remember what we're talking about here, what we are talking about is the Electoral Count Act is a law passed by Congress, which stipulates and details the process and procedure for counting electoral votes and raising objections. And I would note, the people who wrote that law in the 19th century would not have created the process for raising objections if it was illegal to raise those objections. By definition, that process is a legal process. So before we even get to the question of immunity, you're talking about raising objections within the context of a law that was passed and has been on the books for over 100 years. Then the question that follows from that is it a duty of the federal government, if it believes that federal election laws have been violated or federal constitution has been violated, which, as you know, Sean, was the core issue at the heart of almost all of these objections, right? That states that engage in behavior that violated both federal election law as well as violated the U.S. Constitution and other examples of illegal behavior. By definition, it's the president's duty to take care of the laws be faithfully executed. Who prosecutes voter fraud? The Department of Justice. Who runs the Department of Justice? The president. So if a Democrat says, we don't agree with the claims, we think this should have been handled differently, we don't think it should have been involved, those are all matters of opinion on their part. There's nothing to criminalize, right? So this would be this would be the core example of exactly why the immunity exists. Because this falls clearly, it's not even on the outer bounds. It falls smack in the dead center of the exercise of presidential duties. And again, if people disagree with it, then they have remedies that are non-criminal. For example, You can vote for somebody else. You can run a different candidate. You can raise awareness. You can start a C3 or a C4 or a super PAC. There's all kinds of remedies in our democratic system if you have a different view. This is very clearly, very straightforwardly an effort to criminalize political dissent. Specifically what they're trying to criminalize here, and we've seen this, Sean, now. We see it in Georgia. We see it in the federal cases. We see it with efforts to disbar conservative lawyers. What we see is an effort to criminalize any right-of-center criticism of the administration of our elections. And we are entering a very dark, brave new world where left-wing prosecutors can incarcerate Americans up to and including the president for raising objections. So while it would be interesting in a law school class to talk about some of these extremely outlandish hypotheticals, it's unnecessary. The Electoral Code is a federal law. Objections raised to it are a federal responsibility. Every congressperson raising objections was acting in their duties, and the president, by the exact same token, is acting in his duties. And so I hope and pray the Supreme Court sees wisdom here, or as President Trump has said, we will indeed enter a new world where presidents will be routinely indicted and prosecuted for all manner of conduct while they're in office, disabling the presidency permanently.
What these folks on the left don't completely understand is that while they're going against Trump right now, they're hurting any future ability of someone of their party to act freely. And that's where I think that sometimes they are so short-sighted in their efforts to get Trump that they don't realize the long-term consequences that they're putting on our judicial system and on our democracy. But Stephen, you touched on something that wasn't where I wanted to go right away, because obviously I do want to get to the border, which is really your wheelhouse. But I get asked all the time, and I guarantee you do too, about the election. And one of the things that when I tell people is where I had the biggest problems were states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, that didn't follow the law. Their state constitutions, their voting regulations were clear about the uses of early voting, drop boxes, etc. And they just blatantly didn't follow it. And so what is being done either by America First Legal that you guys lead, or any other efforts that you're aware of to make sure, first and foremost, that these states, Nevada, Georgia, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, follow the laws and don't use some crazy excuse to switch the rules in the middle of the game?
Yes. Well, first of all, this really underscores the preposterousness of the whole situation, as you mentioned. Multiple states using COVID as a pretext violated their own state election procedures. And in so doing, also violated the constitutional requirement that state legislatures establish those procedures. In other words, the Secretary of State, just because they're a Democrat, doesn't get to say state law no longer applies, I'm making new rules. Multiple states, including Wisconsin, as an example, engage in black letter violations of state law.